Welcome along to another installment of the Wisdom of the Scholastic series. It's great to have you with us.
Yes, welcome.
Today we're exploring the really profound ideas of John Duns Scotus. He's, well, a towering figure, isn't he? His thought still sparks interest and debate centuries later.
Absolutely. And our guide for this exploration is Jeremiah Hackett's work. He offers a wonderfully concise yet really illuminating introduction to Scotus's life, and maybe more importantly, his quite novel approach to individuality.
That's our mission today, really, to unpack some core Scotist ideas, try to move beyond the simple labels you sometimes hear, and, get to grips with the subtleties that made him so significant.
We'll look at his unique perspective on what makes something individual, how he saw philosophy sitting alongside theology, and touch on his lasting impact, too.
Sounds good. And if you enjoy this kind of exploration into key thinkers, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Maybe click that notification bell so you don't miss future discussions. Okay, let's start by setting this stage. Hackett introduces Scotus by contrasting him with a Thomistic view, specifically through James Joyce. Can you sort of paint that Thomistic picture for us first?
Sure. Joyce, well, his character Stephen Dedalus talks about grasping an object, say a basket. The first step is seeing its boundaries, seeing it as one thing, whole, distinct from everything else. That initial grasp of it being self-bounded, complete. That's what Aquinas called integritas.
Okay, so integritas is that immediate sense of unity, of being clearly defined. But as Hackett points out, this bumps up against a classic problem when you think about Aristotelian science, right? What's the puzzle Scotus saw?
Well, the crux of it is this. For Aristotle, and Aquinas largely agreed, real scientific knowledge is about universals. It's about the general types, the shared essences. So if our best way of knowing focuses on what's common, how can we have genuine, rigorous knowledge of the individual? This specific person, this particular basket right here, that tension, that's what Scotus really dug into.
Right. And Scotus, Hackett explains, had a different take on this integritas idea, didn't he? It wasn't quite the same as the Thomistic view, especially concerning beauty.
No, it wasn't. What's really interesting is that Scotus saw beauty not as some single, simple property. Instead, he viewed it as an aggregatio, he called it, of all the properties an object has. Its size, its shape, sure, but also, crucially, all its connections and relations, internal and external.
So it's not just a unified form, but this whole complex web of properties and relations that make something complete and beautiful for Scotus.
Precisely. Aquinas would emphasize the unity coming from a single substantial form in, say, a living thing. Scotus, he proposed something different. He thought a composite being's unity came from a kind of hierarchy of forms, the forms of its parts ordered under a final, ultimate form, but without those lower forms being destroyed. And this view lays the groundwork for his most famous idea, Hiatus.
Hiatus. Okay, the big one. For listeners maybe not steeped in medieval Latin terms, can you break down what Hiatus, or this-ness, really means? And how's it different from Aquinas' quidditas, the whatness?
Yeah, this is absolutely central. Hiatus, for Scotus, isn't just adding a bit more detail or perfection to a universal form. Forms, well, they're inherently general. They can apply to lots of things. Hiatus, though, is the positive intrinsic reality that makes this specific composite being this specific composite being. It's the ultimate principle of individuation, making it irreducibly concrete. It's not just what it is, but that it is this one.
So quidditas tells us what the kind of thing it is, its essence. But hiatus points to its unique, unrepeatable individuality.
Exactly. And Scotus actually suggests individuals, because of this unique thisness, are in a way superior to or more ultimate than the essences or common natures. As Hackett quotes him, the ultimate specific difference is simply to be different from everything else. Every individual, like every person with their proper name, has this unique individual nature. Hackett uses the word character. Each is a unique character.
That's a really powerful idea, isn't it? This inherent, irreducible thisness. Now, Hackett pivots a bit then from the ideas to Scotus the man. He mentions Heidegger wanting to just get straight to the philosophy. But Hackett argues for the value of context. Why is understanding a bit about his life and cultural mentality helpful?
Well, Hackett suggests that knowing Scotus was, both Scottish and a medieval Franciscan friar, deeply committed to St. Francis, helps understand his worldview, his Weltanschauung. It positions him within a context where perhaps the natural world had a particular resonance, maybe hinting at what Hackett calls a mysticism of nature. It gives a flavor of the person behind the arguments.
That Franciscan angle is interesting. What do we actually know about his life? Hackett acknowledges the details are a bit scarce sometimes.
They are somewhat scarce, yes. We know he's linked to the town of Duns in Berwickshire, confirming his Scottish roots. More solidly, he was ordained a priest in Northampton, England in 1291. That places him likely studying at Oxford around that time. By 1300, he was licensed to hear confessions at Oxford. He lectured on Peter Lombard's sentences there, probably around 1298-99, and then later in Paris after 1302. He became a regent master in theology in Paris, a very prestigious position. There might have been a brief return to Oxford during some political trouble, but his final months in 1308 were spent in Cologne, teaching at the Franciscan study house there, which was developing into the University of Cologne.
Quite a journey across the major intellectual hubs of Europe. And that epitaph Hackett mentions really captures that, doesn't it?
It really does. The inscription on his tomb, though it's from the 19th century, it reflects an older tradition reads, "Scotland gave birth to me, England received me, France educated me, and Cologne now possesses me." It beautifully sums up his pan-European significance.
So, beyond the life, what about the work? Hackett details his major writings. The commentary on the sentences seems central.
Oh, absolutely central. Like others, he used the sentences commentary format, but he really transformed it into a vehicle for profound speculative thought. His masterpiece is the Ordinatio. Think of it as the authorized, revised version of his lectures on the sentences.
And it wasn't static, was it?
No, not at all. It was a continually developing work. The Assisi manuscript 137 is incredibly important because it seems to stem directly from Scotus's own working copy, showing revisions and additions, a process that apparently continued even after his death by his students. It's like a living intellectual project captured on parchment.
Fascinating. What other works should we know about?
Well, there are his commentaries on Aristotle, on logic and metaphysics, which he likely worked on alongside the Ordinatio. Then there are collationes, which are basically records of academic disputations he held, and two important theological treatises, De Primo Principio, on the first principle, and the Theoremata. Hackett stresses, though, that these all connect back to the Ordinatio. Scotus saw his theology as a unified system.
Hackett also mentions the long history of editing and publishing Scotus. It hasn't always been straightforward.
No, it hasn't. The first big collected edition, the Opera Omnia, was by the Irish Franciscan Luke Wadding in the 17th century. Even earlier, another Irishman, Maurice O'Phailly, edited the commentary on Aristotle's Metaphysics. So there's this long Hiberno-Scottish connection in preserving his work.
Right.
But compared to, say, Aquinas, getting critical, modern editions of Scotus has been a slower process. A dedicated Scotistic commission was set up in 1927, but it's painstaking work. Hackett notes, interestingly, that the critical edition of William of Ockham Scotus's main philosophical opponent was completed more recently.
And that lack of accessible editions, especially translations, has been a barrier for modern readers, hasn't it? Hackett credits one scholar in particular for helping bridge that gap.
Absolutely. Father Alan Bernard Wolter. His translations have been absolutely vital. Works like Philosophical Writings, A Selection, a treatise on God as First Principle, and Duns Scotus on the Will and Morality. They've really opened Scotus up for English-speaking scholars in the 20th and 21st centuries. Wolter's analytical work on Scotus's philosophy has also been hugely influential.
Okay, let's place Scotus in his intellectual world. Hackett clarifies he wasn't just reacting against Aquinas, though they differed. What was the broader context?
Well, both were deeply engaged with Aristotle, trying to synthesize his philosophy with Christian theology. But Scotus came slightly later, crucially after the Parisian condemnations of Aristotelian ideas in the 1270s. These condemnations, often pushed by more traditional Augustinian theologians, created a climate of suspicion around certain Aristotelian doctrines, even affecting how Aquinas was read initially.
So there was a pushback against Aristotle.
Yes, a resurgence of what's called New Augustinianism. Thinkers like Henry of Ghent were very prominent, championing ideas like divine illumination, the notion that human knowledge ultimately depends on direct enlightenment from God, which could seem to downplay the power of natural reason.
And into this mix, Scotus throws his doctrine of the univocity of being. This sounds like a major original contribution.
It was absolutely radical. You see, for Aquinas, the primary object our intellect naturally grasps is the sensible material thing. For the Augustinians, there's this reliance on divine light. Scotus says, no, the first and proper object of the human intellect is being itself ends in quantum ends. And crucially, he argued that being is predicated univocally of God and creatures.
Univocally, meaning it means the same basic thing would apply to both.
Exactly. Not analogously, where the meaning shifts significantly, but univocally there's a common core concept of being that applies across the board. to God, to substances, to accidents. This might sound abstract, but it had huge implications. It essentially carved out a distinct territory for philosophy, focused on understanding being through reason, separate from theology, which starts from faith and revelation.
That's a big shift. How did it affect the relationship between philosophy and theology in his system?
It led to a clearer separation than you find in Aquinas' synthesis. Philosophy investigates being. Theology explores the content of faith, using philosophical tools perhaps, but ultimately grounded in revealed truths. Hackett is careful to note, though, this didn't make Scotus a fideist, someone who thinks faith has no rational support. His philosophy was still open to the divine, but it had its own proper object and methods.
A fascinating balance. Let's talk about his influence. Hackett points to several later thinkers who saw Scotus's importance. Charles S. Peirce, for example.
Yes, Peirce, the great American pragmatist and logician, had immense respect for Scotus. He called him one of the greatest metaphysicians. Peirce was particularly interested in Scotus's handling of universals and individuals, and especially his realism. Scotus's view that universals have some kind of real status, independent of our minds, was foundational for Peirce's own theories of signs and meaning. It stood in contrast to the later nominalism, the via moderna, associated with Occam.
And perhaps more surprisingly, Martin Heidegger. His early work engaged with Scotus.
It did indeed. Heidegger's Habilitation Schrift, the big work that qualified him to teach at university level, written in 1916, was titled The Doctrine of the Categories and the Teaching of Meaning in Duns Scotus. Now, the second part dealt with texts not actually by Scotus, as it turned out, but the first part showed a serious grappling with Scotus's genuine thought. Hackett even speculates, provocatively, about a possible link between Scotus's Heise test that radical individuality, the thisness, and Heidegger's later key concepts of Dasein, human existence, and Sein.
Wow, that's quite a connection to draw. That focus on the concrete, unique individual resonating centuries later. Who else does Hackett mention?
Well, there's Etienne Gilson, a giant of medieval philosophy studies, who wrote a major book on Scotus in 1952, and Marilyn McCord Adams, whose work on Occam necessarily involved a deep dive into Scotus, given their intertwined philosophical debates. And of course, Alan Wolter's analytical studies, not just his translations.
And Scotus wasn't just about metaphysics, was he? Hackett mentions ethics and the will.
Absolutely. He had a very sophisticated theory of action and ethics. His doctrine of the will is particularly important, emphasizing its freedom. Hackett notes that Hannah Arendt, in her Gifford lectures published as The Life of the Mind, discusses Scotus alongside figures like Augustine, Nietzsche, and Heidegger as crucial for understanding the philosophical concept of the will.
Okay.
And Mark Henninger's study on Scotus's realist view of relations is also highlighted, showing how his ideas continued to shape debates in specific areas of philosophy.
It's clear his reach was incredibly broad. Now, finally, Hackett brings it back home, so to speak, to Scotus's Scottish legacy. Did his origins matter in the end?
Hackett argues yes. He points out that with Scotus, the theological school at Oxford really hit its zenith, becoming an intellectual powerhouse equal to Paris, known for its critical, independent thinking, something Scotus embodied. This influenced later Oxford thinkers.
And there was a direct line of Scots carrying his thought forward.
Yes. Hackett traces this lineage, especially mentioning John Major and his circle around the time of the Reformation. Major, born in East Lothian like Scotus centuries before, is presented as a key link.
John Major, how so?
Major taught in Paris and is seen as bridging Scotus's kind of critical realism with the later Scottish common-sense philosophical tradition. He was influenced by Occam too, but maintained that rigorous analytical approach associated with the Scotus tradition.
And Major connects to some very big names later on, according to Hackett.
Remarkably so. Hackett cites the work of Thomas F. Torrance, who argued very strongly that John Calvin learned his methods of interpretation, his hermeneutics, directly from John Major when Calvin was a student in Paris. So through Major, Calvin's whole approach to theology was indirectly shaped by the legacy of Scotus and Occam too.
That's incredible. Scotus influencing Calvin via John Major.
It's a fascinating thread. And Hackett adds that Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, was actually a fellow student with Calvin under Major for a time. So Major's classroom in Paris, steeped in this tradition ultimately going back to Scotus, had students from all over Europe who went on to have enormous impact.
What an incredible legacy, spreading out from this medieval Scottish Franciscan. From his really groundbreaking ideas about what makes something this thing, Haecatus, to these far-reaching, sometimes unexpected lines of influence across philosophy and theology. Scotus really is a figure of enduring significance.
He certainly is. And as Hackett notes, the work continues. The slow but steady progress on the critical editions of his works means there's still more to learn, more depth to uncover in his complex thought.
Well, we hope this exploration today, as part of our Wisdom of the Scholastic series, has given you some valuable insights into John Duns Scotus and why he remains so important. What aspects of his thought struck you the most? Do you have more questions about Hypatia, or maybe that connection to Calvin?
We'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Please do share them in the comments section below. It helps continue the conversation.
Absolutely. And if you found this discussion helpful and want to explore more foundational ideas in Western thought, please do like this video and subscribe to the channel. Clicking the notification bell means you'll be updated about future installments in this series and our other explorations.
We really value your engagement and look forward to continuing this intellectual journey together.
Thanks for joining us.